He was just doing his job, quietly, attentively, as he did every day. But today was different. The red Ferrari standing in front of him was not just a car, but a challenge, and perhaps even a test. The owner, a rich man steeped in pride, smiled and said, "If you drive it, it's yours." Then his laughter echoed in the air, as if he had already decided the outcome. Everyone stood to watch the spectacle, but no one knew that in the coming moments, the very person who was considered inferior was going to change everyone's beliefs. Does pride always win, or does truth sometimes win silently, leaving smoke? Mark Joseph was a simple mechanic, the old workshop, the smell of oil, and the hands that talked to the machines. To him, cars weren't just iron, they were stories. Each engine had its own sound, each problem its own patience. At the end of the day, when everyone else was whining or complaining, Mark would just grab a cup of coffee and sit in front of his mother's picture and say, "I'm not going to give up yet, Mom." He lived far away from the wealthy area of the city. People there often passed by the workshop with just a glance that saw status, not humanity. Mark had become accustomed to it, but sometimes he wondered, are the hands of hard workers always meant to be black? That morning, fate took a new turn. A red Ferrari loaded onto a truck stopped in front of his workshop. A man arrived with the car, shiny shoes, an expensive watch, and the same old arrogant smile in his eyes. Mark rolled up his sleeves, but he had no idea. Today would not just be another workday for him. This day was going to be a test of his dignity, his patience, and perhaps his identity. Mark peeked under the Ferrari's bonnet. The engine was silent, as if someone had sucked out its soul. But there was peace in Mark's eyes. He knew every car, no matter how expensive, is ultimately brought to life by the hands of a human being. On the other hand, Mr. Clark was standing with his friends, laughing. "Do you really think this guy can fix a Ferrari?" one said. The other said, "These guys can barely ride a bicycle. Ferrari? This is ridiculous." Mark listened, but remained silent. He arranged his tools, slowly opened the bonnet, and began work. Beads of sweat were running down his forehead, but his eyes were only on the machine. Clark approached, said arrogantly, "Look, if this Ferrari stays closed today, you don't show up here again." Then, with a sarcastic laugh, he said, "And if it works, it'll be yours." The crowd erupted in laughter. It was a joke, but for Mark, it had become a question of his honor. Hours passed. The sun began to set.
Mark's hands were covered in black oil, but his face glowed with determination. When everyone's patience was over, Clark laughed. "Enough! People like you can only make a mess, right?" Mark raised his head. There was no sweat in his eyes, only fire. "Sir, this is not a car. This is an opportunity. And you don't waste an opportunity." He turned the last wrench. There was a soft sound, as if the engine had taken a breath. Mark turned the key. For a moment the air was still. And then the Ferrari roared. People's eyes were wide open. Clark's face froze. The man who was considered inferior had changed everyone's beliefs today. The sound of the Ferrari engine was echoing as if years of silence had been screamed out. The crowd was shocked, but Mark was silent. He knew this victory was not of a car, but of a person. Mr. Clark said with a sarcastic laugh, "Well, maybe someone helped you." Mark replied with a look in his eyes. "No luck, sir. Hard work." This sentence was a blow to Clark's pride. People like you are only there to be used, not to win. Clark pushed Mark in anger. Mark fell. Oil spilled on the ground, as if the truth was being written itself. He got up, stood still, and said, "Sir, the car is yours. But today you saw, Respect is something that money can't buy. Silence fell. Clark's friends lowered their eyes. The cameras were on, but no one was laughing anymore. Mark picked up the tools, gave the car a final look, and drove away in silence. The Ferrari behind him was emitting smoke as if pride had burned to ashes. After that day, Mark returned to his old workshop, but he was not the same Mark he had been before. His hands were still stained with oil, but he had a new belief in his heart that honor is something that no one can take away. The video of this incident went viral the next day. Millions of people watched. Some applauded, some cried, and some thought for the first time that perhaps skin color does not determine a person's worth. For Clark, this moment became a mirror, not an embarrassment. People began to remember him, not as a businessman, but as a man who gave up his humanity to a mechanic. There was now a rush outside Mark's workshop. People came to get lessons, not just cars. He would smile and say, "Ferrari still runs. It's just that the ideology has changed now." At night, he would look at the sky and think, maybe one day there will come a time when no one needs to prove that they are equal. But until then, there will be a Clark in front of every Mark. And every story will begin again with the roar of a Ferrari. Because sometimes the loudest sound is not the engine, but the conscience.